Delisle. He's the Assistant Deputy Minister of Manitoba's Treasury Division. And I also have Rodney Balkwill. He's the Executive Director of the Treasury Management Branch in Saskatchewan's Ministry of Finance. So I'd like to start off with a broad question. Don, if you could start off and kind of give me your fiscal outlook.
Sure. No, I'll be pleased to. So just last week, both our 2021 public accounts as well as our first quarter for the current fiscal year came out. Absolutely no surprises. Basically, both right on forecast. The first quarter came in again right on where budget was, about a $1.5 billion deficit. Where expected, there is $1.2 billion in pandemic relief in that budget. So again, no surprises. I think we're fairly optimistic going forward. The independent economists that we use have been continually upgrading our forecast. For 21, they have a 10.7% increase nominal and 5.7% real, and for next year, 5.1% nominal and just 3.7% real. So getting pretty close to full recovery back after the COVID pandemic. As well, some of our key economic indicators are showing some very good strength. We have the lowest unemployment rate in the country at 5.7%. Retail sales are up almost 21%. Manufacturing is up about 14.5%. And exports are increasing very well as well. The other benefit we've always had is we're one of the more diversified, most diversified economies in the country, with no more than 10% in any sector of the economy. So we were also in a strong position going into the pandemic, with in 2020 having balanced the budget for the first time in over a decade, and unfortunately for this current government, kind of got lost in the pandemic. So this government's fiscally focused, and on a go-forward basis, they've again committed to balancing the budget in 8 years. Keep in mind, they said that when they came in 2016, and they did it in half that time, in 4 years, to balance in 2020. So we know that's where their commitment will be. So going forward, we're pretty optimistic. We're doing pretty good right now with the fourth wave, touch wood. So all in all, optimism at the moment, all things considered.
Okay. And Rodney, what is your outlook? Are you pretty optimistic as well, even though we do have this fourth wave and the Delta variant causing some restrictions across provinces?
Yes, we're still fairly optimistic. Obviously, the fourth wave, it is impacting Saskatchewan harder than other provinces, and so there's some pessimism there. From a fiscal perspective, we did build in quite a bit of expenditure into this budget for 21-22. So we are forecasting a $2.6 billion deficit. And our recent update in August, our Q1 update, did indicate that we're still on track for that. And while we are seeing improvement in taxation and royalty revenues, we've also set money aside for agriculture supports, as in this province and through much of Western Canada, there has been dry growing conditions. And so we're anticipating support payments to both crop and livestock producers. So our optimism from an economy recovering perspective is still there, although we do have some downside from the crop aspect of things. So that is going to keep our deficit as expected, but it doesn't diminish our expectation to get back to balance in the next 6 years. It should be just a blip in the road, and then carry on as like most provinces, we are seeing better economic recovery and better revenue recovery than we had anticipated.
And you're talking about some issues in the crops. I'm curious, from an economic perspective, I've been hearing a lot about supply chain issues in agriculture and other areas. Is that something that is weighing on in your province as well?
Supply chain issues are always critical for agriculture and all the other commodities that we produce in this province. Through the pandemic, they weren't really impacted to the same extent as others because they're very hands-off, as you can imagine. Trains crossing borders, bulk products going on ships. In fact, we saw exports increase during the pandemic for Saskatchewan as opposed to decrease as those supply chains held up. These days with agriculture, the main supply chain issue was actually forest fires that were happening in the west, further west in British Columbia, which impacted rail shipments and continue to, and then also some broader impacts on the shipping side of things has impacted movement of grains. So yeah, something we're very concerned about and watching, but so far has not impacted to the same extent as perhaps some other areas of the economy.
Okay. Yeah, those forest fires were pretty bad this summer out west, and even Ontario had some. Could you guys tell me what are your borrowing needs for the rest of this year? Don?
Sure. Our borrowing program is 5.7 billion CAD this year. We're at the moment about 50% through our current year's requirements, and with the expectation of borrowing that 5.7 billion, we will be pre-funded going into the next fiscal year by about $1.5 million. We are attempting to stay very liquid these days because of the uncertainty with respect to COVID, the pandemic, and whether that's going to have any effect on markets. It's just, we're not quite sure what's going to happen potentially with expenditure. So again, we're going to continue to stay conservative and very liquid. We're going to do that in both domestic and international markets. Our main focus is the domestic market. We look at to do benchmarks, but in 5, 10s, and longs, specifically in 10s and longs, and we will look at international opportunities both in the U.S. as well as other currencies, because we have both the U.S. dollar registration statement with the SEC as well as an EMTN program and an Aussie dollar program in place. So. We're quite optimistic about getting the completed full completion of the borrowing this year.
Are there any international markets you think are most likely? Is it the U.S. dollar market or the Aussie?
The U.S. dollar bond market is a key strategic market for ourselves. We attempt to go there once a year as benchmark. We certainly not lost on us that it's been significantly over a year because of the pandemic getting down there, but that is a market we'd like to get a benchmark on at least once a year. So we are watching that market very closely. And the rest of the markets, Aussie dollar, one-offs off our EMTN because we were in many currencies, sterling, Swiss, New Zealand dollars, Noki. I'll swap back to Canadian dollars. We have to make sure the arbitrage is working and that it's cost competitive with what we can do domestically.
And Rodney, what are Saskatchewan's borrowing needs this year?
We have a $4.6 billion borrowing plan, and like Don, we're pretty much on pace, almost halfway through. Borrowing completely in the domestic market so far, but we do have plans to access the international markets to a larger extent than we have in the past. So last year we re-entered foreign markets by issuing a small amount in euros, and that was the first foray into the international market since 2003. So we're stepping back in slowly, but this year we would anticipate by the end of our fiscal year in March that we could be into the U.S. dollar markets and possibly a euro trade as well. We're open to all currencies, but those are probably the first steps in the near term. But it will depend on pricing. We're not a frequent issuer, obviously, in those markets, but and we don't actually have to be there unless the pricing makes it work. So we'll be watching to make sure we're picking up maybe 5 or 10 basis points in cost savings, in addition to all the other benefits that expanding our investor base brings to us.
And did you say that would be in March sometime you're going to look at that?
Well, we think we can maybe get it done by the end of March. So I would say the earliest given the way documentation works and things are all working a little bit slowly these days, if markets are on the right spot, we could be looking at first 3 months of 2022.
Okay. And what is it about international markets that are looking more attractive right now?
Well, for us, not being in the international markets means moving into those markets opens up a whole new level of investor base, investors to purchase our debt. So the province's debt. So in Canada, it's a very deep market. It's been very good for funding. But from a risk perspective, it's a great idea to broaden out into the broader world markets that buy in obviously other currencies than the Canadian dollar. So that can, the end result, of course, is potentially lower borrowing costs and more avenues for funding should difficulties arise like we witnessed last March through the pandemic. So it just really elevates the game and in terms of the sophistication of the investor base that we can bring to bear.
And I'd like to talk to you both about any plans to issue green bonds. Maybe if you could talk about anything, if you have historically, and why or why not. Don?
Certainly. To be honest, we're in just the preliminary stages of having internal conversations on an ESG program. We are working with the Department of Conservation and Climate on this initiative. I can't emphasize enough that it is in the preliminary stage. The challenge for us is going to be able to identify enough projects to sustain a formal ESG program and the work that's going to go into that with respect to having the website, getting it rated, et cetera. So that is, again, in the initial stages, and we'll see how that progresses over the next year or so. The other thing probably should be noted is that we do all the borrowing for Manitoba Hydro. Manitoba Hydro is the sole electrical producer in the province, and they are one of North America's clean energy providers, with over 97% of their electricity generated through hydro. 2.5%, I think, is in wind, and less than about 0.1% in thermal. So about a third of their generation is exported to the U.S. and other provinces, and that is helping them reduce their carbon footprint. For example, the U.S. exporters are almost all thermal.
Is there a lot of demand for you to issue green bonds? Why would you consider that?
There is definitely a demand. There is an investor that I've been talking over the last number of years with that haven't asked whether we're going to be doing it. I think, again, the biggest challenge for us is to identify projects. Sewer and water, public transportation is all at the municipal level. So for us, I think if hydro had been starting the big projects they had done, the generation station kiosk, as well as the Bipole 3, the HVDC transmission line that they just completed, and we're starting that instead of completing it, I think it would have been front and center for us putting it into a program.
And Rod, does Saskatchewan have any plans for a green bond issuance in the future? Is that something you're looking at, some kind of ESG bond program?
Well, it's an interesting area, and we do have an active file, especially on the green side of things. Saskatchewan is historically a carbon-intensive province. Its industries are resource extraction and agriculture, and its power plants have been historically carbon-fueled. But we have committed to the federal government to eliminate all coal power generation by 2027, and that will be replaced by other transitional fuels, but also increased hydro imports and the possibility for small modular reactors down the road. Now, to the extent that those could be green projects is open to debate. Certainly transmission lines bringing in hydropower could be lumped into that. But we're probably looking at it more from a transition transition perspective. And there is an increase in the green area, the green arena for transition type funding, which would be probably where Saskatchewan would line up. We do have solar and wind farms. The projects aren't huge, but certainly there could be some funding that way as well. And the ESG side is a new area. Of course, government is very active in social programs. How that fits into funding is a little bit newer area for us, and we're starting to look at that as well to see if there are opportunities there.
And will there be any challenges that you're worried about on the revenue side for the government, as we do have a push towards reducing carbon emissions, and we do have the new government that is very aware of that? Rodney?
Well, certainly, it's a concern. There is oil produced in this province, and from a pricing perspective, that can impact revenues, impact demand, impact the price of these resources. I won't comment on what's going on between, or I wouldn't be able to comment on what's going on between at the political level in terms of addressing those issues. But yeah, in an economy like this, there's some things that probably need to be addressed in terms of making sure it's a smooth a transition as possibly can be expected.
And Don, does that have impacts as well as when your province forecasts revenues and so forth?
No, again, as I'd mentioned earlier, our oil and gas is in Manitoba is very, very small. All generation of power here basically is electrical, or is hydro for electricity. And with respect to the diversified economy we have, they're really not expecting any kind of significant effects on our revenue base at all.
Okay. And I just have a little bit of time left, so I did want to ask you, I know you both said you're pretty optimistic on the outlook looking forward, but is there something that you're a little concerned about, or that's keeping you up at night as we do enter the fourth wave? We don't know how that may affect things. Don?
Yeah, right at the moment, we're pretty fortunate. We've got one of the lowest infection rates in the country on a per 100,000 basis. If you were to take a look at the Johns Hopkins data, I think we're fourth lowest. Only Newfoundland, PEI, and Nova Scotia are lower than us at the moment. We did get hit fairly hard with the second and third waves, but we have one of the highest vaccination rates. Over 80% of our eligible citizens are double vaxxed. We were one of the first provinces to put in a mask mandate for all indoor public places. And we do have a vaccination passport for things such as dining, indoor sports, for example, Winnipeg Jets, et cetera. And so as a result, that we're hoping that these measures are going to continue to keep the rates down and allow to keep businesses open. This is fully supported by the chambers of commerce and other business communities, so that we can keep businesses open. So again, as optimistic as we can be in this type of environment.
Yeah, I do remember hearing when Manitoba was in, I think, a very strict lockdown, maybe earlier this year or late last year. Yeah. So it sounds like things have opened up.
Yeah, that was during the third wave. Yes, they have opened up. And again, some of the measures put in place, as I just mentioned, I think are helping significantly with that.
Okay. And Rod, what does the outlook look like for Saskatchewan? How are they dealing with this fourth wave?
Well, as we mentioned on the opening, the fourth wave is hitting us harder. And so, the optimism is tempered by that. New restrictions are in place in terms of vaccine mandates and gatherings. So there is some and mask mandates, of course. So that has the potential to slow things down a bit. At risk of being definitely not sounding optimistic. It's a difficult thing to get through. So, but the economy seemed to have figured out from some perspectives how to operate in these environments. We will expect to see, the higher healthcare costs coming as a result of this. I think that hasn't been announced yet. But those are things that we would be on the lookout for sure. And then for us globally, it's a big question about, does something impact the global economy, as we are a very outward-looking province economically. And so from a commodity perspective, or a trade perspective, those things are some of the bigger risks. So, but cautiously optimistic.